we get really hung up on us being the protagonists in the story, right? Like we're the heroes, we're the main characters. We are not. We are Obi-Wan and they are Luke Skywalker, and we need to know who he is and what he's all about and what his fears are and where he gets hung up and what his challenges are so that we can tell that story from his point of view.
This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Tara McMullin, a powerhouse in the realm of serving small business owners. She's the founder of the What Works Network and host of the What Works podcast. Listen as we talk about the transitions Tara's been through in her business. You'll hear how starting with a very narrow niche helped to accelerate her growth. We also talk about how her role has changed in her company and how and why she's avoided the role of guru. You'll also hear what's been working extremely well for Tara in being more effective with social media. It's all about storytelling. As soon as you hear what she has to say about this, you'll start using social media differently. Tara believes in sharing experience rather than advice, and I totally agree. And you're in for a treat as she shares some key parts of her own experiences. Welcome, Tara. Thank you so much for being here.
I am so thrilled to be here, Annie. Thanks for having me.
I want to dive into a couple of things, and I'm fully aware that we may only have time to dive into one of them. But what I want to talk about is both how your niche has changed over time and how your role in your company has changed over time. So now you have a huge following and you're helping people all over the world, business people all over the world. And I want to talk about the fact that even though that is true, that's not where you started. So you started with a much more narrow niche. Can you describe the people who you started with?
Yes. So if we go all the way back to the beginning, the niche of people that I started with were makers and designers and craftspeople in Pennsylvania. That's it. That was the group of people I started with. My very first website was called handmadeandpa.net. And so even more niche than that, specifically, I was looking at sort of the new maker movement here in Pennsylvania where I live. And my goal was to highlight those makers and craftspeople. And because that still felt very, very new at the time. We're talking about over 10 years ago now, back when Etsy was still just a very small marketplace. Not a lot of people shopped there. Not a lot of people knew about it. But I was really excited about it. And so I really wanted to lift these people up. And then secondly, I wanted to connect them to each other. So I knew I could tell that these people who were operating largely online were actually really isolated from each other. So they might connect in an Etsy forum or they might connect on a Facebook page, but they didn't really have anywhere that they could go and actually make friends. There might be a comment here or there, but there weren't real relationships forming. And I knew that if we could get them together, that really cool stuff could happen and they could help each other out. And so that was sort of the second goal of that website. And for the first 6 months of my business, that's the only people that I focused on. And that really allowed me to make inroads in that community very, very quickly, where I had literally no credibility. My only credibility was, I love you guys. I love what you're doing. I love what you make. And I think more people should know about it. But because I was talking to a really specific group of people, I could, they trusted me really quickly. There wasn't any sort of like, is this for me? Is this not for me? No, like it says right on the website, handmadeandpa.net. If you make things by hand in Pennsylvania, you belong here. And I want to help you and I want to support you and I want to show people what you're doing. And so it really allowed me to make connections incredibly quickly. It allowed me to build community incredibly quickly. And it allowed me to meet people who then would provide me a huge step up into other markets. So whether that was the Pennsylvania Guild of Craftsmen or whether that were some other bloggers in my space, I don't think those connections would have happened had I just started something really general or something that didn't have as much of a specific focus as that initial community and website had.
And so I'm thinking, for one thing, it was a small enough niche to really become a big player quickly. And then it was also a niche you were genuinely passionate about.
Yeah, I was really excited about it. I have always been interested in craft. My mom was a seamstress my whole life. I have never been a crafts person, though. I'm really bad at doing things with my hands. But I loved it. I legitimately loved it. And I loved what I saw happening on sites like Etsy or some of the other competitors that were around at the time. And I just wanted more people to know about it. And I thought, hey, I think, let's try this out. Let's see what happens when I create something for these people. And I kind of just wrote it from there and saw what they needed, responded to that, brought them together, saw more of what they needed, responded to that. And it just became a really, really quick cycle of being able to create bigger and bigger things based on starting with that really small seed group of people.
And what was the first thing you created for them?
Well, that's a good question because 10 years ago, we weren't talking about writing ebooks and we definitely weren't talking about writing online courses or creating online courses. And so the first things that I created were, the blog itself for sure, but also early on, people started asking me questions about blogging. And so I can remember doing a series of posts on how to approach blogging a little bit differently than maybe they were approaching it before. I had a different take on blogging in general because I had started way earlier. I started writing my very first blog in 2004 while I was still in college. And then I had taken a really long break, but I came at it thinking like, I know how to do this blogging thing, not realizing that I had missed 6 years of blogging evolution. So when I came back, my blog looked really different from a lot of other people's. And that was part of the early success there too. So anyhow, I created this series of posts on blogging. But the first kind of educational things I created were done in collaboration with the Pennsylvania Guild of Craftsmen. It was the same sort of thing. They came to me asking me questions. Well, how are you making this blog? Maybe we should make a blog. How are you doing this social media thing? Like maybe we should do this social media thing. And so they brought me in to teach workshops to their artisans. And that was sort of like my initial foray into education. And it was hyper focused on, how do you take fine art photography? How do you take fine art ceramics or fine craft ceramics? How do you take fine craft jewelry and present that in a way that makes sense in this digital medium? It was totally new for them. It was new for me. It was like, we'll figure this out together. And that's what we did.
Okay. And in a way that's brilliant. And in a way that's what has continued to happen, right? Is that you're responding to what you're being asked, but then you're also looking at it in this different way with perhaps a vision that other people don't have. So over time, what stands out to you as sort of the places where that niche expanded significantly? I know that is a huge question because this is like a 10-year journey, but what stands out?
Yeah, that's a great way to ask the question. And some definite inflection points stand out to me. So the very first one happened the very first summer. So 6 months after I started my business, I actually acquired another website, essentially acquired another business because a blogger that I had met through handmadeandpa.net wanted to unload her blog so that she could go off and actually do the design business that she really wanted to have. And she said, all right, Tara, clearly you can create something for more than just this tiny group of people. And so she had a globally recognized, again, design and maker blog. And we agreed on a price. I took the site over. And all of a sudden, I didn't have a statewide audience. I had a global audience. And it, relatively speaking, the audience was still fairly small, but the platform, like the step up in platform was exponential at that point. And now I was writing for a much larger group of people. It was still super focused on the new maker movement. But from there, it was able to expand. And so I started to talk not just about the new maker movement, but I started to talk about independent business in general, and people making their own way. And that started to bring in then the seeds of the market that I serve now. So at some point, I realized that while I had this sincere and authentic passion for craft and handmade goods, that I didn't actually know very much about running a craft or handmade goods business, right? I didn't have a product-based business. I could learn more about it. And there were things certainly that I was good at teaching and that I was good at sharing with these people, but their needs started to diverge from where my interests naturally were, because my interests were with what I needed too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was learning about running a service-based business. I was learning about digital, sort of the next generation of education and online education. And so that's where more and more of my focus started to happen. And I can't remember like the particular day or moment where I made the decision, all right, you got to be done talking specifically to the craft market, and you need to pivot more onto the services side or the digital product side of things. But there was that shift and an intentional shift in who I was talking to. And my goal was never to exclude product-based businesses. And to this day, I don't exclude product-based businesses, but I did start talking about business in a different way. One that was way more easy to recognize for a service or digital products-based business as opposed to a physical products-based business. And in our community today, we have both or all three groups, but it's way more oriented and way more and the group that is biggest are the service providers. And that's just sort of been that kind of just happened very naturally. And so there was an inflection point there. Like I said, I don't remember the particular thing, but I do remember, like sitting down to write my email for the week and reminding myself it's okay to talk to the people that you want to talk to the people you know how to help best. And so I did start to move away from that niche of people that had served me, that had grown up with me, and that I have loved and still love serving, but just recognizing that I had already moved in a different direction, and it was time to start actually talking that way. But I will say, and maybe you want to talk about this too, but that was a really long transition. Like the step from Handmade in PA to Scouty Girl, that happened literally overnight. And that was awesome. And I'm so glad that it happened overnight. But the transition from shifting the focus away from physical product-based businesses and into digital product and service-based businesses literally took years to get really focused on and clear, and less from my perspective. For me, it happened very quickly, but from an outside perspective, it took a really long time. I can remember being interviewed for a podcast years after this transition had happened, where the guy interviewing me said, "So you're kind of the Etsy business person, right?" I was like, "Oh my God, I have not been the Etsy business person for literally like 3 years. It's so funny." And there was a very small part of me that was mildly offended by this, that like you didn't do more research, not being associated with that market, but like, why didn't you do more research on this? It's very obvious not who I am. But the biggest thing was just like, still, wow, there is my reputation or the expectations that people have are still influenced by who I was talking to 3, 4, 5 years ago, which is incredible. And that transition, and I tell this to anyone who is making any kind of pivot, any kind of transition in the segment that they're speaking to, the way they're representing their brand, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to require a lot of conscious effort on your part, and it is absolutely worth it. So start now, because every day you wait to make that change, you're going to regret that you didn't start sooner, right? So just get going.
Get going as soon as you know. And one thing that I have talked to you about with my business was, making a pivot recently over to Rebel Therapist and helping therapists go beyond the therapy room. Like one thing that I did, partly influenced by you, was to really make it transparent and to really talk about the pivot a lot with my audience. And I don't know, maybe some listeners would disagree, but I don't talk about myself very much. But with this pivot, I really amped that up. And I feel like it really helped in having people, even though that's a really smaller pivot than what you're talking about. But I'm curious, do you feel like there's anything that you would do even more of if you were time traveling and doing that pivot again?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think then I probably would have done exactly what you're describing, which is just being more transparent about it and explaining why I was doing what I was doing. Because I think, yes, your reputation sticks with you for way longer than you expect it to, but also because people were genuinely confused. And I think I still deal with that today. So for instance, with our What Works community, even in the last year and a half, we have had people ask or say, this sounds really, really great, but I know you mostly work with product-based businesses. So are there service providers like me in there? and vice versa. People will say, I know you only work with service providers. Are there people that have product-based businesses? And it's like, yeah, we have artists, we have illustrators, we have photographers, we have makers, we have designers, and we have all these other amazing service providers in here. It's a whole mishmash of people, which we can talk about being a problem later on. But, it was confusing for them then. It's confusing for them now. And I still deal with the extra work that I have to put in now to say who this is for, because I wasn't clear then. And I didn't tell the story that I needed to tell, because it's not just explaining, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, but it's really taking the audience along on a particular story. Honestly, story is something, and maybe this is an aside, but story is something that's been on my mind a lot lately. What's the story I'm telling with my podcast? What's the story we're telling in the community? What's the story that I'm telling on social media, on Instagram, literally on Instagram stories? Anytime I'm thinking about what I need to explain, how I'm going to explain it, or just something that I want to relate to people, I'm thinking about it through the lens of telling a story. And I think this is relevant to this idea of, finding your niche, choosing your niche, understanding your niche, because your niche is the character. Right? The people that you serve are the most important characters in that story. And the more you understand who those people are, the better equipped you are to put them in the position of being the protagonist in the story, right? Because we're always we get really hung up on us being the protagonists in the story, right? Like we're the heroes, we're the main characters.
We're the Luke Skywalker.
Exactly.
Right.
We are not. We are Obi-Wan.
Yes.
and they are Luke Skywalker. And we need to know who he is and what he's all about and what his fears are and where he gets hung up and what his challenges are, so that we can tell that story from his point of view. And the more I can do that, and sometimes it is telling my own story, but telling my story in a way that makes it feel like their story, because it is like we're living the same stories. The more I do that, the clearer it is, the more response I get, the more engagement I get, the more people ask questions back. And then that creates the next chapter of the story. And so that for me has been a way of really making my communication and making the decisions that I make in my business a lot clearer, so that people get it the first time instead of needing to be explained again 5 years in the future.
Yes. And okay, so this is one of my favorite tangents that I've ever gone on. You said something recently, I believe it was on Instagram, that really stuck with me about specificity in storytelling. That when we try to be really broad in the stories we're telling, when we try to kind of like just put the big values and the big themes out there, it kind of falls flat. And that when we can be really specific about maybe our own story, maybe someone else's story, the details of what's happening, that actually pulls people in much more quickly.
Yeah. So this is something that I had inadvertently stumbled on and then read a brilliant article by Anne Handley, who is the founder of Marketing Profs. And she's sort of like, she is up there with like Brian Clark from Copy Blogger in terms of the genesis of content marketing as a thing. Like, she is amazing. And so she wrote this blog post about why we need smaller stories in content marketing. And she quoted Ira Glass of This American Life fame, who talked about how the biggest stories that are out there, stories like the refugee crisis, stories like climate change, those stories are incredibly important and we need to tell them as often as we tell them. But the problem is the more we talk about the refugee crisis or climate change, the more people tune out. But we can still tell those stories by getting super specific and telling a refugee's story. Like, tell me about the little girl in the refugee camp and tell me about the first 2 hours of her day. Like, that's all I need to know to create an incredibly powerful connection with that story and those people and everything that's happening with that. With climate change, tell me about the polar bear who's making a journey northward just to find food because he can't get back on the iceberg or, whatever it might be. Like, those are the stories that stick with us. And this hit me as like, it explained everything that I had been having success with in social media to that point or not to that point, but in the last 4 months or so, since I've really changed up my own social media strategy. Let me back up. There's so much to unpack here, but in our community and on our podcast, my philosophy is sharing experience instead of sharing advice. And that also goes to sharing experience instead of like teaching a concept. So I used to teach a lot of concepts. In fact, I have been criticized for being too conceptual, right? Testing a product. Like, let's talk about testing a product. You've probably heard about testing a product before, right? It doesn't necessarily teach you something new for me to tell you, all right, you got to test a product. Here's a way to do it. Report back with your results. That could be helpful. And also, I can have someone on my podcast share exactly how they got the idea for the product they wanted to test, how they created the initial test, how that test iterated into the next piece of that puzzle, how they marketed and sold that product, and then what they're going to do next. And that lesson is going to stick with you a lot more. Better example now. For social media, I've been sharing a lot about just sort of like my personal leadership development, thinking through like, what I'm doing to make myself a better leader. And one of the things that's been coming up for me a lot lately are my own mental patterns and habits, right? And so I'm sure your audience can relate to thinking about habits and mental patterns. And that's probably a story that your listeners have told over and over again, whether it's in the office or it's in a group or it's in a workshop or just even on social media or in their content marketing. And I don't have the knowledge to be able to say, well, here's how you understand your own mental habits and here's how you change them and here's what's going to happen when you do that. And it wouldn't be helpful if I did, but what I can say is here is a habit that I have. For instance, I posted on Instagram and said, I can now recognize that when I see people at a higher level of mastery to me in a particular area, I pivot out of that area because I am intimidated by those people. I quit when I see someone do something better than I can currently do it. And here's how I'm changing that pattern for myself. Here's how how I've decided I will push through and persist. And so I posted this and the floodgates opened, right? So many comments, so many direct messages. And every single time I can take a bigger lesson that I'm learning and share it through a podcast guest, share it through my own experience, and make that story as small and human as possible. Those are the things that get the most engagement. Those are the things that get people talking the most. Those are the things that create a much deeper sense of connection with me, but not only with me, they create a deeper sense of connection to my approach to things. And my approach to things is my why. It's our mission. It's the backbone of everything that we do as a company. So yes, it is personal to me. And you might say, oh, Tara, that, personal brand stuff. Okay, fair. And also it is so much bigger than that, because for me, representing that story creates a connection to what we do, regardless of whether I'm part of that picture or not. And so therefore, even though those stories are human scale, the benefits of telling those human scale stories are infinitely scalable. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's just so helpful to think about this, especially if you're feeling like your storytelling isn't working. That, for some reason you're saying these brilliant things. You're a therapist, you've been trained in this, you have so much experience in this, and you're putting your pearls of wisdom out there and they're just not really being picked up. I think this is just such a brilliant way to approach it.
Yeah. And I am so glad you brought that up, because we spend so much time, I think, or I certainly have in the past, trying to be profound on social media, right? We just desperately want to sound smart and say profound things and change people's lives. And I know, I don't know how other people do it, but when I'm scrolling through Instagram, the last thing I want to read is a profound quote of someone quoting themselves in their Instagram feed. I'm just not interested in that. But I will read story after personal story after personal story after personal story. And the people who do it well, I think, are the people who are teaching a lesson through their own challenges, or through a friend's challenge, or through a client's challenge, or whatever it might be. And I will call out that I recognize that there are particular ethical challenges for therapists telling, I think, human scale stories. But I think we need to find a way.
There's a way. I agree. I'm glad you brought that up, so that if anyone's listening and thinking, oh, that's not for us. No, it is. There are ways to do it. And we will talk more about that as we go. But yeah, there are ways around that. Okay, it's future Annie jumping in for a minute. Do you want to expand your business beyond what it is now? Do you want to work differently? Use parts of yourself you're not using and you wish you were? Do you want to make more money without adding client sessions to your week? One thing that can get in the way of stepping into that vision is not knowing how, and not even knowing where to start. So if that's you, I've got a program coming up for you in August of 2019, the Rebel Therapist 2-Day. Join me and a small group of people trained as therapists to clarify your leveling up vision and make a doable plan to get started on it. Head to rebeltherapist.me and click on Rebel Therapist 2-Day to learn all about it and apply. It happens on August 29th and 30th of 2019. Okay, let's get back to our chat with Tara. Another thing I want to touch on is something that you've really brilliantly shifted in your business over the years, which is your role in your company. And so without you intending to, of course, a lot of us saw you as a guru and would come to you for advice, and wouldn't be satisfied until we got your advice. And so how have you shifted that over time so that you were instead what you now call yourself, a super user within your community rather than the leader of your community?
Yeah. So we live in sort of this advice culture, which kind of plays beautifully into what we were just talking about, right? These big generic stories, it's a lot of advice. And there's a lot of commercial trade in advice. I'm not going to say that you can't make a lot of money giving people advice. You can make lots of money telling people what to do. And so there is this sort of prevailing narrative that when you tell people what to do, they respect you more, they will purchase more from you. And there are whole business models and business formulas that are built up around this thing. And I had worked really hard to not put myself in that position. When I started building my signature business coaching program, there was a collaborative community group element to it. And anytime I would get on the phone with someone and they'd say, well, the program looks really great, but can I do this with you one-on-one? I would tell them, look, yes, we could do this one-on-one. You're not going to get as good a results with me working one-on-one than you will working in a group of people who can support you and who you can riff off of and you will be friends with for the rest of your business life. And so that's why we do it this way. And I was very adamant about that. And what I learned is that because I was building my business and building this program within a model that within this kind of advice culture model, as hard as I tried to get people to help each other, like you said, what they really wanted at the end of the day was my opinion, what I would do in that situation, what I thought they should do in that situation. And I think that just kind of as an aside, we have to be really careful about the expectations that people have coming into something. So whether that's coming into a program, a workshop, the therapy room, whatever it might be, people come in with particular expectations. And if you don't want them to have that expectation, you have to do something really different. You can't do something kind of different. You have to do something really, really, really different. And so that's what led me to redefining my role. And I couldn't just redefine my role. I had to redefine our business model to be able to do it. And it was hard, and it still is hard. But we, a little over 2 years ago, we pivoted to a completely community-based model where I say, I don't give you the answers. And also, there's no advice in this community. We prioritize experience over advice, like I had said before. I will share my experience and I will share my observation, but I'm not going to give you advice. And I tried to rip the Band-Aid off, and it was really hard to do that. But little bit by little bit, training myself and coaching everybody else at the same time, I was able to really reposition myself. To me, what was the most interesting part of that, though, was not the initial decision to do that and the initial systems that we set up, but actually recognizing all the ways that my old role as an expert, as a kind of default guru, had influenced the way I did things. So I thought, well, okay, I ripped the Band-Aid off. Now I am a facilitator and I'm a super user. I'm not the expert or the coach. This is great. But I didn't recognize that I was trying to market that innovative community-based approach to business support as an expert, right? So I was doing webinars, and I would do a webinar and I would teach people things. And then I'd say, come join our community where you cannot learn from me anymore. And that, spoiler alert, that didn't work. And so that tipped me off to the fact that there were all sorts of different ways I was still showing up in the business as an expert. And little bit by little bit, I needed to identify them, rework my role, and create a new way of showing up in that aspect of the business. So whether that was marketing or it was operations or it was the podcast or, even the way I was working with my team. And I think that's probably the place where I'm still learning and growing the most is what is my role in my team? But oh man, it's been such a crazy journey to figure that stuff out. And there are still places where it's not perfect, but that has been a huge transition for me, but it's been such a valuable one.
I'm really curious in that transition. This is such a therapist question, Tara, but what has it been like for you emotionally to step away from that kind of leadership role? Has it been uncomfortable in any ways, or has it been a relief? Like, what are you going through emotionally around it?
It's so crazy. So the thing is that I have this like split personality around being the one with the answers. So like I really love being the person with the answers, and I really love that people want to know what my opinion on things is, right? So like even as you know, I took up bouldering a couple of years ago. So climbing, but on smaller walls, no ropes. And at the bouldering gym now, I'm a teacher. I teach our like beginner bouldering classes, and I get so frustrated when people ask other people questions about how they should do something, and they don't recognize that I'm the one with the answer, right? Like I want people to come to me and ask for help. And at the same time, I believe so strongly in peer-to-peer support. Not that there isn't a role for a coach, not that there isn't a role for an expert, not that there's not a role for even advice. I do still believe in those things. But I believe that most of our like really quality progress comes from peer-to-peer support, like working things out with other people. And I see it even in the bouldering gym. So I can teach someone, I can teach a class, I can teach a technique, I can coach someone through climbing a problem that uses that particular technique. But the next time they come up to the wall and they have to utilize that technique again, I might not be there and they're not going to be able to do that themselves. What actually ends up being the source of most of their progress is when they are climbing in a small group of people and they're working this stuff out together. So it may take the group 20 tries at a move to figure out the best way to do it. But I guarantee you that lesson of trying it 20 different ways before they figure it out will stick with all of those people longer than if I gave them the answer.
Ooh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we know that this is true. And so for me personally, it is that constant struggle of wanting to step in and say, here's how I would do this, or have you tried this, or this is my.
Absolutely. And this is so important for therapists thinking about going beyond the therapy room or staying in the therapy room even to think about how does real change happen? Because we know, I mean, this is what we do, but it can be so tempting to try to put something into your business model that just like is giving the answers.
Right, exactly. So like to the point about like the emotions behind it, there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of sitting on my hands. There's a lot of questioning who I am and what I'm all about. I mean, there's been, I was just being interviewed by Lou Blazer from Second Breaks just earlier. And she asked me like, did you go through an identity crisis? And it's like, yes, no. And also I'm always in an identity crisis. It feels like right now. And I do think that, you know, whether it's that you've studied for years to become a therapist and you've worked as a therapist for years and now you're branching out, or for me, like working so hard to build up a reputation as a business coach and as an educator, and then tearing that all down and telling people, no, you can't look to me for the answers anymore. There is bound to be like so much emotional baggage with that. And so many times that, you know, I've questioned, is this the right path? Who am I? How am I showing up in this moment? But at the end of the day, I think finding the balance, accepting that sometimes I'm going to be frustrated, accepting that sometimes I got to sit on my hands. That's like a good human lesson, I think, to learn in addition to a good business lesson to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Being able to tolerate that frustration for a bigger purpose. That's beautiful. So how would you now describe because I kind of blew past this one. I think people are getting a sense, but how would you describe the people who you serve right now?
Yeah. So the people that we serve right now are people who have been in business for at least a year, more likely 2 or 3 years. They are about 60% service providers. They're about 30% digital product creators, or I should say maybe 25% digital product creators, and then about 5% makers, artists, folks in that category. But they are small business owners. Like the thing they all have in common is that they're small business owners. And they've been in business for a few years. And the reason that we serve people past that beginning point is that we want to talk to people about what's working and what's not working. And early on in your business, I don't think you have the capacity for that conversation yet. You've got to work everything out by doing it. And I think that so I'll just speak for my industry in the small business realm. We want to give people the answers way too early instead of letting them experiment and figure out what it is that they want to be doing, how they want to be showing up. And so anyone who's kind of earlier than that, we say, look, you're not ready for us yet. Here's what you need to do. Go out into the market, sell some stuff, deliver some stuff, see what you want to do next. And then when you've done that and you've got something that you feel really good about, come and join us and let's talk about how to make it better. And so that's the one thing, or in addition to being small business owners, that's what our members have in common, is that they have something that's working on one level or another and they want to make it better. And that's what we really talk about. So yeah, we talk about what's working, what's not working, but at the end of the day, there are conversations about making our businesses better, not starting our businesses, not fixing our businesses, but making them better.
Okay, excellent. So one more question that I just love knowing this kind of stuff. How do you start your day, and how do you get yourself going in the morning? What works well for you in terms of productivity in your company?
Yeah. So my morning routine starts with coffee and oatmeal and then a 90-minute gym session most days. I hate rest days.
Yeah. Really? Wow.
Oh yeah, I'm a glutton for punishment. Anyhow, no, I love it. I just love working out, and I love what moving my body does for my mind, which is why it's I include it as an important part of talking about my morning routine. Like I was just bopping home after the gym this morning. I could not wait to get started. I'd had such a good session. So once I'm home from my workout, I kind of dive into my business just sort of head on. Like generally know what my main priority is for any given day. And that's what I'm going to start with. Yes, I process email. Yes, I check in with my team. But I know, as so many people do, there's basically one good thing I'm going to get out of every single day. So Mondays, that's probably a lot of podcast work. Tuesdays, that's probably a lot of podcast work. It's like podcasting and writing are Monday and Tuesday days. And, the specific priority will change from week to week, but that's what ends up happening those days. And then Wednesdays and Thursdays, my main thing is whatever appointments are on my calendar. And so I just prioritize being able to show up for an interview, for me interviewing someone, for a mastermind session. And so whatever I need to do to start my day to make that feel really good. It might be preparing some agendas. It might be double checking over my interview questions. It might be taking it easy that morning. Like this morning, I took it pretty easy because I knew I had 3 appointments. I was ready for them. And I just needed to make sure that I had the space to be able to show up for those. So yeah, it's a lot of, my morning routine is focused on consistency, getting my mind right, and really setting myself up for that one key priority for the day. Does that work?
I just love hearing that stuff. So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for letting us look behind the curtain.
Totally.
So thank you so much, Tara. This is just giving us so much to chew on and to think about. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. I've loved the questions, and these conversations are some of my absolute favorite to have.
Learn more about Tara McMullin and the What Works Network and podcast by going to explorewhatworks.com. If you found Tara's experience helpful, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. I really appreciate it, and it makes a big difference in helping other folks find the show. I will see you soon.
Yes, I'm a little less versed with my Star Wars references than my Star Trek references, but I can hang with original Star Wars. It's fine.